Hey guys, what's up? Excoundrel here. We're going to be looking at the MOHAWK Gunship today, the new GDI unit announced, and it's been coming out on the next update. The MOHAWK Gunship is a 50 cost helipad unit that is good versus vehicles and really doesn't do anything else. Not great versus infantry, can't attack units in the air. It's pretty beefy, has a high DPS, fast movement speed, and actually a really important stat that isn't often included, it deals 1 attack every second, and for a frame of reference, the Pitbull deals 1 attack every 2 seconds. So that's the kind of difference, the frame of reference that you might need to understand just how quickly the MOHAWK Gunship shoots. Now, the gimmick of the MOHAWK Gunship is that it can only attack from the left-hand side of its unit model, which means there is going to be some rotational speed involved when starting to attack units. You will have to be kind of aware of that. It does rotate pretty quickly, so for most players this won't make much of a difference, but just be aware, if you approach a unit from the wrong side, the MOHAWK Gunship will need to do a complete 180, and that could play into some of the matchups that it has. I'm going to go over a lot of the bad matchups, and you can see I'm not going to include every single unit ever. I'm really just going to be showing you versus certain types of units, but you can see it doesn't do enough damage to infantry, and a singular missile squad is enough to clean up the gunship. Sending 2 pitbulls at a defending gunship is good enough, although it trades one of them, it will go down as the second is there. However, when going to return to the pitbull, and you can attack a pitbull head-on, it actually will beat it at even levels. So it is a 10 Tiberium difference between these 2 units, and the MOHAWK Gunship comes out on top in a 1-on-1. So you need to send 2 pitbulls at a MOHAWK Gunship to be able to come out on top. Same with attack bike squads, and again, on equal levels, it will take 2 shots per bike to kill it, which means it still remains pretty healthy, but the actual matchup is pretty similar to that of a pitbull. 2 sets of attack bike squads will deal with the MOHAWK Gunship pretty quickly, however, even though it'll be able to get through a single set of them, just like the Pitbull, it won't be able to touch the second set of attack bikes. So the Nod GDI matchup, as well as the GDI matchup, is pretty similar. An attacking Widowmaker or an attacking Wolverine is going to beat the MOHAWK Gunship, but just barely, and actually, if you look at pure health values, it really comes out pretty even between the 2 of them, with the Wolverine winning by just a small amount, as well as the Widowmaker winning by just a small amount. Things like the Sandstorm, Zone Troopers, anything that is really solid anti-air is going to deal with the MOHAWK Gunship pretty quickly, and because it can't attack air units in response, Phantoms and Hammerheads, and even Banshees are going to clean up the MOHAWK Gunship pretty quickly, so you do have to be aware of anti-air units when playing this. It is a fairly beefy unit, however. It will take a number of shots from the Banshee to take it out. So we're going to move on to what it's decent at doing. The MOHAWK Gunship will clean out squads like War Dogs really quickly. Its high sustained DPS makes it really good versus Predators and Scorpions and beefy ground units, and much more so than the Orca. Less risk to putting out a MOHAWK Gunship versus these types of units, and sustained DPS means it should kill these before the Orca can, with the Orca's reload speed being factored in. So it is a good point holder versus these sort of light and heavy vehicles that can't actually respond to the MOHAWK Gunship. And being 50, it is still a fairly cheap unit. It is really good at dealing with things like the MLRS or the Giga Cannon, especially if your Orca can't one-shot them. And this is something that a lot of people will complain about versus the MLRS or the Giga Cannon. I've had this happen in my games, where your Orca isn't a high enough level to one-shot it, and therefore it feels very hard to actually do well into the MLRS, whereas the MOHAWK Gunship is a good remedy to that. It is a common unit, so it is going to be fairly easy to grind. It's going to be fairly easy to grind cards for. So you've looked at these sort of the weaknesses and the strengths. It honestly does have some glaring weaknesses, but I think there are certain situations where the MOHAWK Gunship can work. And this dude in particular, Oksana, oh well, I'm going to say Oksana, she's a Nod commander. Colonel Jackson in particular works really well with the MOHAWK Gunship because of that attack speed. That base attack speed of 1 a second means he's going to get plenty of benefit out of Colonel Jackson's heroic charge. And you can see it doesn't change all of the matchups, does better into the attack bikes than before. However, you might be surprised to see that it actually wins versus even level pitbulls when using that Colonel Jackson's heroic charge. So that tells you a little bit about how the matchups change. The Nod attack bikes are slightly better into the into the Mohawk Gunship than the Pitbulls are. It changes matchups even when on lower HP versus things like the Widowmaker and the Wolverine. It'll end up winning those matchups, and that was a Mohawk Gunship that already taken some damage there as well. So you just got to be aware that this is a unit that synergizes really well with Colonel Jackson, and it will definitely influence a lot of the matchups that you have if you use Heroic Charge. You can absolutely blast through ground units if you're using that particular ability. And you saw me have 2 Mohawk Gunships deal with a singular Mammoth tank earlier. Let's take 1 Mammoth tank versus 1 Mohawk Gunship with Colonel Jackson's Heroic Charge. Look at that sustained DPS. Really high damage output. Obviously the Mammoth tank's damage to aircraft units is awful, but a singular Mohawk Gunship will take out a Mammoth tank if left to its own devices, and especially with Colonel Jackson's Heroic Charge on board. So, where do I think the Mohawk Gunship is going to play into with Command & Conquer Rivals? What kind of decks do I think the Mohawk Gunship suits? Well, honestly, I think it's quite difficult to slot it into a deck easily because it is a very specific unit that has a very specific use. It's not that adaptable. It has this awkward turn speed. It's really only good versus the sort of the bigger ground units or units that can't respond to it. Things like Pitbulls and attack bikes, if sent at the right time, will deal with it nicely, and even just a simple single missile squad can take out the Mohawk Gunship if not protected. I do think, however, it can function in a GDI aggro deck that wants to run a little bit more than just the Talon, for instance, and it will give you good point control. Think of it like a really good anti-vehicle point control. If you're struggling to deal with attack bike squads in their single versions, or even Scorpion tanks being sent at points, the Mohawk Gunship is a really good anti-tank unit that can be thrown onto a point. And versus certain tech units as well, like you saw with Colonel Jackson, it can trade up versus even Widowmakers and Wolverines, and if they get their Titans on the board, the Mohawk Gunship will deal well with Titans and Avatars and things of that kind of stature. So even with, you know, seeing a lot of Avatars on the Nod side of things, the Mohawk Gunship actually has a place to do that. However, it is so specific and quite easily countered that it really requires a certain setup to make work. I think it's going to be a decent unit, but I don't think it's going to be insane. Being common, though, it does mean we should be able to get our hands on it pretty quickly, and you guys can all try and find what kind of deck this can work in. I think a lot of testing is going to go into the Mohawk Gunship, and I guess, hopefully, we'll find a way to make it work. I'll see you soon.